The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 53.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Thank you for joining us on the EL. Today we have S.J Scotts, author of Habit Stacking. Welcome, Steve, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thanks for having me, Wade.
Definitely. Will you take just a moment to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Sure. My name is Steve Scott. Actually, I go by the pen name sometimes of S.J Scott. I've been kind of self-employed for the last 10 years in a variety of internet businesses. Specifically, the last 2 years, I've been into Kindle publishing, and lately mostly talking about habit development. And I kind of got into the habit development market like a lot of people. Like I want to improve my own life, and I pretty much write books that come from my own personal experience and things that I talked about with other people.
Thank you for sharing that. Now let's jump right into your book, Habit Stacking, which was just made available for purchase on April 16th of 2014. And Steve, we're going to move quickly, but here are some of the top questions that our listener/reader would like to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing Habit Stacking?
To be honest, it came from a position of frustration. Like a lot of people, I have probably no difficulty with forming major habits. Like, for instance, it wasn't too hard to form the writing habit because I could see a direct correlation between that and my personal success. But a lot of times the little things like taking vitamins, stretching, reviewing my metrics, all stuff I know is important for my day-to-day routine, I would end up letting them slip through the cracks because I would be working on what I consider larger issues or larger projects. So what I decided is I just wanted to figure out a way to do all these tiny little habits and put them together in a single routine. And I started doing that. Every single morning I'd wake up and run through about 10 to 15 different habits that would improve my various aspects of my life in some way. I would just put it in a routine. I didn't really have a name for it, but I did this for about a year. And then one day I'm trying to think of a topic for a book, and I realized that one thing that I did in the morning might be something that people would find valuable.
Excellent. What would you say, we talk about it all the time, there's so many books on entrepreneurship, or even in this case, maybe hacking that come out in any given month. So what makes your book different from others regarding the same topic?
I would say most books talk about huge issues, like huge habits, like writing, losing weight, becoming more productive at time management, that sort of thing. But I'd say not too much attention is paid to towards those small little things that you know can improve your life. Like an example I use in my book is about a couple of years ago when I was first starting dating who's my fiance now. We lived apart. We lived about an hour and a half from each other, and she basically was getting annoyed because there'd be very little communication during the day, and I could tell it started hurting her feelings. So one simple habit that I started doing is just texting her 10 minutes or 10 seconds every morning. I'd text her something really nice and sweet. And almost overnight, that improved the quality of our relationship. And you would think just a 10-second text wouldn't really make that much of a difference, but I found that just those simple little things can help my life in some way. So for instance, if someone's listening is into productivity, maybe you know about the importance of blocking out your day or identifying the key steps in a project or removing distractions. You probably know about the value of all this stuff, but how often you take those 5 to 10 minutes every single day and just do these small little things to potentially make your workday a lot more efficient.
And Steve, how do you want the reader, or how would you suggest the reader engage with your book? Is this one that they can jump in and out and look at these different techniques, or is it one that they should really read from front to back?
I would say the back part are just some simple suggestions. I talk about 97 small life changes, and those are just kind of more of the spark the idea. But I would say anyone who's listening to it has their own type of small little changes that it can introduce to their life. But I would say, to answer your question, the first part they would definitely they get a pretty simple framework, and the book's only about 20,000 words, so it's a pretty quick read. But there's a framework there, and it talks about how you remove distractions from yourself. And I guess the one important thing that take away from both this interview and the book is, instead of relying on multiple triggers for multiple habits, like for instance, when they go to work, there's obviously triggers to do certain things without your workday. What habit stacking is about is creating one simple trigger and just following through a bunch of small little changes that you want to introduce to your life.
Okay, perfect. All right, now that we know the background behind the book, this is my favorite part, and where I'm basically going to hand over the mic to you and ask for you to basically just give us a great rundown or a great summary of what your book is all about.
Okay. Pretty much I'll just run through generic, pretty much how the book is laid out. So to start with, I'd introduce the idea that little hinges swing big doors. And the idea here is what I've talked about a little bit before, that these small little changes can actually produce a big, significant, lasting change to your life. So I kind of go over the idea that all the different aspects of your life, for instance, productivity, relationships, finances, organization, spirituality, health, and leisure, you can add these small little life changes, and when added together, they can really do a lot for self-improvement. Pretty much the next section I go is introduction of the habit stacking, the kind of the mindset behind it, how you can actually add dozens of small little habits to your life with one single routine. Because generally most people rely on multiple triggers, like I said before, to do all sorts of different habits. What I talk about is you do all these things for one specific trigger. I know I keep on saying the word trigger over and over, but for instance, when you wake up in the morning, that in itself is a trigger. So you wake up, you get out of your bed, and you just literally pull out a list and you follow all these individual habits. Then I kind of go into the difference between small changes and mini habits. And actually, a friend of mine, Stephen Geis, has a course about mini habits. And his idea there is to actually get over your perfection mindset and a lot of struggles that people have with starting a habit is they create these large obstacles which often seem insurmountable. To use an example, some people would have trouble committing to a 2,000 word a day routine for writing, but if you commit to 100 words a day, most people can get on board with that and write a little bit at a time and not be so overwhelmed by the idea of a goal. So I kind of set the framework between what a small change and what a mini habit is, and basically a mini habit has a chance to grow, whereas a small change, with the stuff I talk about in my book, those are individual habits that have a start and finish, and you really can't improve on them. Next, I go into the 8 elements of a habit stacking routine. I basically talk about how it takes only 5 minutes or less. It's a complete habit, and the total routine should be about 30 minutes or less. And a good substantial part of the book is I go into the individual examples of habits that you can develop. So there's 97 examples I include in the book, and that includes examples for productivity, relationships, finance, organization, spirituality and mental well-being, health and physical fitness, and finally leisure. And after that, I pretty much give the framework for the habit stacking routine. And that talks about picking a time and location, like I mentioned before, either when you get up in the morning or when you sit down in front of your desk for your work day. Focusing on one routine. So you really want to build one of these routines at a time. You shouldn't try adding a bunch of routines for your morning or evening because simply put, we all get really busy. And if you're trying to do too much with your day, you're more likely to fail. You want to commit to one routine at a time. I talk about the importance of putting everything into a logical checklist, having a good solid reason why you're doing each one of these habits, and then using rewards to kind of keep you going to follow this routine. The next section pretty much talks about triggers and why they're important. Kind of what I mentioned before, a trigger is an outside event where you basically don't have any control that acts as a catalyst for following the habit stacking routine. So for instance, we all have triggers in the morning when our alarm clock gets up, or our alarm clock goes off. So we hear our alarm clock, we know the sound means we get up in the morning, we start our day. So for instance, if you want to have a good habit stacking routine, you could tie it into your morning routine. So the alarm clock goes off, they use that as a trigger to pull out your habit stacking checklist and just start following the routine. After that, I go into 2 examples of a habit stacking routine. I give an example of a productivity routine and a morning routine. And finally, I end with disruptions and challenges. And the idea here is we all have stuff that just happens in our lives. We go on vacation for a couple of weeks. What happens when you get back, and how do you get back into the habit stacking routine? Stuff like that. When life throws you a curveball, how do you overcome it? And pretty much as a conclusion, I just summarize everything and provide an action plan.
So you just went through a ton of phenomenal information. And that's what makes this next question somewhat difficult. And that's, if the reader could only take away one concept or principle or action item out of your entire book, what would you want that to be?
I would say you could put a bunch of small little habits into a single routine, and you don't really need a bunch of fancy processes to get them done. You just create one trigger, and you can just follow all of them and complete them in a logical order.
Will you give us an example? I know that's kind of putting you on the spot. Can you give us an example? Because I think what you just said was huge.
Okay. Well, actually, if you give me 5 seconds, let me pull up my checklist. Okay, so for instance, in the morning, I'll do I'll wash my face with warm water because that's been scientifically proven to kind of wake you up and kind of get your mind straight. Because I don't really take showers in the morning. I take showers after exercise in the evening. So I wash my face with warm water. I weigh myself to kind of make sure that I'm staying at a certain weight for my marathon training. I drink a a glass of cold lemon water, because that's another way of kind of waking up and recharging yourself for the day. I do rebounding exercises for 5 minutes. I make my bed. Kind of what I use the example in the book is I talk about fixing broken windows. That generally, because I work from home, if you see a huge mess and you see a bunch of things in disarray, you're more likely to feel lethargic and not unmotivated. But when you kind of clean up all this, the area around you, you feel like, okay, everything's in order. So I'm prepared to face my day. Take vitamins, eat some fruits and vegetables, and I text my fiance, and I go over a number of small little productivity things like setting up my 3 most important tasks for the day, all the time blocks and the schedules that I have, like, for instance, this conversation, and I just start my workday.
That's huge. that was awesome. That was a great example.
Okay, cool.
So do you have a favorite quote from your book? And it might not be one that, so I'm hoping that you have one maybe that you chose that you've written, but also if not, one that maybe the audience has told you, something that's resonated really, really well with them.
I like the quote that kind of summarizes the whole scope of the book, but I like "Big doors swing on little hinges," and that's by W. Clement Stone. But the idea there is that you can make a huge change in your life just by following and introducing small little changes.
Perfect. And if there was one other book, I think for a lot of people, this can, some of these habits and the stacking that you're talking about is going to create a paradigm shift for them and help them move forward. And what is a book that you've personally read? And it doesn't have to be on habits or entrepreneurism or anything like that, but what's a book that created a paradigm shift, made a huge impact in your life?
I'll probably give the answer that many people have probably given before, but I like Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk, just for a simple fact that I'm a firm believer in dedicating yourself to one endeavor and working as hard as you can really can provide a lasting change in your life. Like for me, it's writing, and I just focus on my Kindle business pretty much nonstop, and that's really, on a personal level, has brought a lot of success to me.
Perfect. And Steve, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to get more information on you and your book, Habit Stacking?
Sure. If you just go to habitbooks.com, that redirects to my Amazon page where I have that book and about 10 or 11 others. And also I have a blog, developgoodhabits.com, and those are pretty much the 2 best places to find me.
Perfect. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your creation with us.
Well, thank you, Wade.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you would like to get your hands on Habit Stacking or any of the other resources mentioned by Stephen, just look at the show notes at the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.